first actions that Kamala Harris took with Joe Biden was to get rid of DNA testing. So here's how it works. They show up on the border, trembling 13-year-old girl who obviously, was just raped a couple times. You could tell her head is down. I've seen it myself. You can go to Yuma to see it, is looking down, and a muscular 35-year-old pimp says, I'm her dad. And there is no DNA testing that occurs. So instead, they just say, sign on the paperwork, here's your asylum date, it's in 3 years, of course it never comes, and the girl is now a sex slave in the United States. Under Trump, we do a DNA test, be like, you're lying, that's not correct, we're gonna find out who her parents actually are, because we're not gonna co-sign to her becoming the worst thing that we could possibly tolerate. However, the church is uninterested in this. Exactly. Pastors are too interested in bigger buildings and more budgets and not in the fact that kids, God's children, are being sold as sex slaves in our own country.
That's Charlie Kirk. And he's absolutely right. Christians could be one of the largest voting blocs that just don't. And it's disgusting to me. I don't know how you could sit this one out. I have no idea how you could sit this one out. And I tend to think pastors aren't shepherding their flock. They're not guiding their churches in the right direction. You see what's happening on the southern border. How could you turn a blind eye to that? It's Super Talk 99.7 WTN. My name's Chris Hand. Where are the Christians at that are sitting this one out? 30 million? 30 million. It blows my mind, especially when it comes to the southern border. Mark Cuban has been out there trying to shill for the Harris administration, the Harris campaign, the Harris regime. And when the topic of the southern border came up during a CNN interview, Cuban had an interesting take as to why we've seen so much illegal immigration under Biden and Harris.
So when it comes to criminalizing and not criminalizing crossing the border, that is just so stark, but you view that as an evolution.
Yeah, look, here's my opinion. I'm not speaking for the campaign with this. Yeah. I thought their hearts were too big when Joe came into office, that they didn't know how many people would cross the border, and it got away from them.
Their hearts were too big, says Mark Cuban. Oh, they were too caring, too kind, too compassionate. They just loved too much. As children are being sold into sex slavery, as children are being sold to go work in random factories across the country, your hearts are too big. Your hearts are so big that you didn't even notice the 300,000 plus children missing in this country. Your hearts, they're just so big, they overflow with so much love. Are you paying attention to what's happening in real time? Are you paying attention? Our hearts were too big, Mark Cuban says. They just loved too much. It's you got story after story after story, and I saw one. There are students being pushed out of a school district in Indiana County, and it's because they've imported too many Haitians. So kids in the city of Logansport, Indiana, are reportedly being forced out of their schools because the county's population is expanded by 30% via Haitian migrants under the Biden-Harris administration. Their hearts, guys, their hearts are so big for everyone but their own citizens. If residents in this city no longer feel safe. This is from the New York Post. The residents obviously are blaming Joe Biden and Harris for the chaos that has struck the city, as they should. As they should. There's a local photographer, Candace Espinoza. She told the New York Post that she has a message to Harris, and it's do something. Do something. Our community cannot withstand this many people being here. There's a mother of two in the same article, Nancy Baker, and she was more blunt and said if Harris were to come to her home, she would say, get off my lawn. Get off my property. Yep. I probably wouldn't be as reserved as that, to be perfectly honest with you. She said, I don't see how she can stand behind Biden the whole time. And she keeps deflecting anytime they ask questions, an Indiana resident added. The Post reported that the population of Cass County has increased by around 30% because of the many migrants moving into the county of 38,000 people. So it's a county of 38,000. They've imported 11,000 more since 2020. The Haitian migrant student population in Logansport, Indiana, in their schools has increased 15 times over just this year. So there's no room for the American citizen students. Their hearts are too big. Their hearts are too big. I also think it's worth noting in this Mark Cuban clip. He says we didn't know as many people were going to cross.
So when it comes to criminalizing and not criminalizing crossing the border, I mean, that is just so stark. But you view that as an evolution.
Yeah. I mean, look. Here's my opinion. I'm not speaking for the campaign with this. Yeah. I thought their hearts were too big when Joe came into office, that they didn't know how many people would cross the border, and it got away from them.
It got away from them. Now, Mark Cuban completely ignores the fact that they actually created a brand new app to fly migrants into the country. In the case of Haitians, they took what would be an immigrant that would have been denied and gave them temporary protected status and brought him in anyway. Their hearts were too big, guys. It got away from them. When they were flying these people into our country in the dead of night, away from the cameras, to smaller airports like Chattanooga, it got away from them. It's just, our hearts were too big. Our hearts were too big. Blows my mind. Christians are going to sit this election out. 30 million Christians are going to sit this one out. How? Why? What are you paying attention to? Are you looking at the news if you're going to sit this one out? Honestly. And it just keeps going. It's like, even with this election coming, you still get more and more bad news from the border. I got a story here. The Sinaloa cartel, drug cartel, the same ones that Donald Trump wants to designate as terrorist organizations that the Biden-Harris administration has basically given them, carte blanche to operate as they will. The Sinaloa drug cartel has now given its members the green light to shoot and kill U.S. border agents. Have we heard anything from the Biden-Harris administration? Crickets, right? Their hearts are too big. They just got big hearts, guys. Not hearts for any Border Patrol members who may lose their lives or their families. Their hearts are too big for non-citizens. Sinaloa drug cartel gangsters have been let loose by their bosses to shoot and kill Customs and Border Protection agents. News Nation reported this on Thursday. The story's from the Post-Millennial. There's always been an understanding between the cartels and the Border Patrol that the gangs wouldn't use lethal force against the U.S. agents lest they invite a massive retaliatory response from the U.S. security and police. But now they don't fear retaliation from the U.S. And just last week, according to the memo obtained by News Nation, ranch contractors in the Eagle Pass area of the Del Rio sector in Texas said they were fired upon by shooters in Mexico. The workers reported seeing numerous individuals where the firing originated, but it was impossible to assess exactly how many. There were no fatalities or injuries reported as a result of this shooting. You don't hear about this on ABC or CBS or NBC. The only way you would hear about it is if an American citizen decided to return fire, because then the news would be like, hey, great, look at these racist Americans that we have at the border. It's crazy. Victor Avila, a former special agent with Homeland Security Investigation, told News Nation that CBP and all law enforcement agencies connected with border security need to take this new development very, very seriously. They say it indicates the structural deterioration of the Sinaloa cartel and the willingness of the surviving factions to take greater risks to commit their criminal activity. He said the number one reason they fight for these plazas is because these plazas are the corridors to enter the United States, whether it's California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas. And that's the major fight because the Sinaloa cartel has controlled that whole area. It's getting dicier and dicier because the money has been getting better and better and better. under Biden-Harris, you have the flow of child sex slaves. You have women being sold into sex slavery. You have actual slavery where people, to pay off the cartels, have to go work in factories. Kids also. The money's too good. The money's too good. It's insane. Christians are going to set this one out. Maybe your hearts are too big. Maybe you're like Mark Cuban. You just have a big heart if you're going to sit this one out. And along with the heightened level of violence, the syndicate also appears to be using more sophisticated military-grade weaponry to commit its crime. Yep. These are the organizations that Donald Trump says we should go on the offensive to take out. These are the organizations that Donald Trump says we need to label as terrorist organizations. These are the same organizations that we don't hear anything about from the Biden-Harris administration. Who do you want controlling the southern border? Cartels? Because that's who's controlling it right now. Blows my mind. Blows my mind. And it's story after story after story. There's also a report of a brand new caravan heading our way. See, like, as crazy as all this news is, you can look at the polling, you can look at what's happening on the streets. Everybody does understand that Donald Trump has a very good chance of winning this race. So you're in a time crunch, right? And now there's a report of a new caravan, 2,500 migrants departing southern Mexico, bound for the U.S. border. This is all according to social media. Breitbart has the story. 2,500 migrants, illegal aliens, departed from southern Mexico on Sunday. The group departed from Tapachula, Chiapas, to reach the U.S.-Mexico border before the upcoming presidential election. It's going to get worse before it gets better. Journalist Wid Lyman posted a Real America's Voice video on X that reports that about 2,500 migrants are headed straight for us. And the video is shocking. They're all military-aged males, as far as the eye can see. I know that doesn't surprise you, but I hope this wakes somebody up. The Associated Press estimates the number of migrants in the caravan at about 2,000. The news organization reported that this is the third and largest such caravan departing from southern Mexico since they got their new president sworn into office earlier this month. So far, the new Mexican president has made no changes to the country's immigration policy, and it was about a week earlier that Breitbart Texas reported that there was a 1,000-person migrant caravan departing from the same region in an attempt to reach the U.S. border before the presidential election. There's only one option if you want to get things fixed, as far as I'm concerned. Mark Cuban can say, hey, the southern border got away from us. The border crossings got away from us. Our hearts were too big. And I just wonder, your hearts were too big for who? Were your hearts too big for the kids being sold into sex slavery? What about Laken Riley's family or Jocelyn Nungari's family or Rachel Marin's family? I mean, we can go on and on and on, the devastation and the destruction that's been caused by this weak, inept, and ineffective administration. And some people may just let it continue by sitting it out. Blows my mind. Blows my mind. And all the while, the country gets less and less safe.